Hi, welcome to the Sideboard. My name's Eric, and this is our first episode of the Fringe, where we'll be covering those less than tier 1 decks that I would expect to see in the upcoming week if I were to join a friendly or competitive league. The first three decks are all going to be coming from Star City Games Classic in Charlotte that happened the same time as the Nationals. It brought us quite a few more variants to some of the decks that we've grown used to. Um, and if we consider most of what we've seen in the Nationals your tier 1 decks, then these are going to be your tier 1.5s. And then the next three decks that we're going to look at are all brought to you by some of your favorite YouTube content providers. We all know that anytime a some of our well-known YouTube content providers produce a deck, that for that next week, that deck is going to get some play. So we're going to look at three highly covered decks and three decks that were proven that may or may not get some play over the next week. So starting us off here, we have Justin Gregory's first place finisher in Charlotte. He ran Esper Gift. Now, Godfarrow's Gift is a straightforward deck. We're not going to talk about how the deck itself is constructed, but more or less the idea of the deck and what we would need to prepare for that deck going forward into a a league. Now, Godfarrow's it uses Gate to the Afterlife to really cheat that in. So we're going to need some way to stop Gate to the Afterlife or to deal with the Godfarrow's Gift after it lands. I think one of the reasons that this deck even put three copies in the top 16 was because of the lack of graveyard hate and the lack of artifact or uh, yeah, we'll just say artifact hate. Um, you're not seeing a lot of abrades and things like that being played main board anymore. So that's definitely opening the way for cards like Gate to the Afterlife and Godfarrow's Gift for getting in there. Also, uh, the deck uses some really powerful cards like Hostage Taker, Kitesail Freebooter, and the Scarab God out of the sideboard. His sideboard is extremely straightforward. He's got some Scarab Gods, in case he thinks you're going to be dealing with his artifact. So he can bring his guy and make 4/4s that direction. A couple of Vraska's Contempt for obvious reasons. He can have some life gain if you're trying to pressure him. A couple counter spells to ensure that he gets down his not necessarily combo piece, but he gets down his the parts to his engine. A couple additional kill spells, some ways to deal with control that we would need to worry about, and a little bit of graveyard hate of his own. Now, granted, this is actually more graveyard hate than I've seen in a lot of decks, even though it's only one card. A lot of decks are just not running any type of graveyard hate, which is, again, probably why this deck surfaced at all. Um, Everything else about the deck is pretty much straightforward, what we've come to expect out of Esper Godfarrow's Gift. So I would just make sure that I was on the lookout for Godfarrow's Gift if I started my league this week. Second deck on our list here. Whoa, where's the list? Second deck on our list, Rakdos. Um, Rakdos Aggro by Travis Bryant. Now, this is really close to a Ramunap Red list. However, it's missing a one drop and it has a couple extra three drops and has a couple nice little pieces of spice. Uh, I I would honestly rather run this deck over red deck, even if red deck is just slightly more consistent. This just looks like it would have more fun, more interaction in it. So I just think that this would be a really good deck. Um, he did take it to a top 8 finish in Charlotte, so it is clearly a proven deck. Taking a look at the deck, what makes it different? Well, he's got some Fatal Push. He to help clear the way. Captain Huey, I'm sorry, Captain Landry Storm instead of Captain Huey Jensen. And Bone Picker. Now, with the amount of kill that he's got and the likelihood that someone's going to be trying to kill his creatures, Bone Picker is an absolutely great card, and I can see why you'd want to put it. I remember Christian Calcano running it in a green black list pre-rotation. So, I mean, yes, Bone Picker is definitely a card that can catch people off guard, and if they're not expecting it, you're now attacking for 3 in the air with all the token variants currently in standard, and no way to trample over those with red deck here. I can see why going into the air was necessary, and probably what helped him get to that top 8 finish. Um, Taking a look at his sideboard here, he's got a glory bringer. If you are a tokens variant, then these decks do run rampaging Ferocidon. Now, most of these decks I see have some version of harsh mentor to fight the Teamer menace, but no harsh mentor in this. He does, however, have the abrades, which I assume helped him get to the top 8, considering how many God Pharaoh's gifts were in Charlotte. But uh, he's got a little bit of reach here with the cut to ribbons. The overall plan for this deck is a lot like that of mono red, is to provide early pressure and continuous pressure on you, that if you ever let up, if you can't answer absolutely everything, then he will get ahead of you. And then cards like Bone Picker will get over the few blockers that you have, or an on-crop crasher will make those few blockers just nullified, and then kind of closing the deal with either a ribbons or one of his multiple copies of Raminat Ruins to finish you off. uh, One thing that you don't see in here is the colorless ruin, that or the colorless desert that just pings for one, the sun scorched. But I'm sure he just didn't have room putting in the dual lands. So I would definitely be on the lookout for variants other than just red deck that still play like red deck. There are a lot in playing in the last couple days. I've seen a lot of Rakdos versions, and even some Mardu versions of aggro. So just kind of be on the lookout for those aggro lists, and just know that they're a lot like the tokens list, as far as what will wipe the board from them would wipe the board from most of the tokens list. However, these decks all have haste, and they're going to be coming in quick. Any type of life gain or early blockers would just be real good against these decks. Moving on down the list here, we're going to jump into what I thought was an extremely spicy list. I'm No, you know what? Actually, no, this is not spicy. I think this list is dull. I am amazed that this list top aided. It just tells you that Kevin McLean seen something that other people did not. Oketra's Monument has proven to us in the past, by taking a handful of cards that were non-playable by themselves and making them not only playable but efficient. Um, this is a vampire deck. I mean, yes, it's mono white monument, but it is using vampire synergies, and that's something we really wanted to see here in Ixalan. I mean, so far the only non-representation has been the merfolk. We're starting to see a few dinosaurs hit the list. We've seen quite a few fun lists pop up from dinosaurs. We've seen uh, we've now seen vampires, and then eh, what we really haven't had a good pirates list yet. There's a lot of people that have built them. Saffron Olive did go to 5-0 with a pirates list, and we have been seeing a lot of pirates online. So I guess Merfolk's the last one. We're waiting on a good Merfolk list to take everyone by storm. But this is your vampires list. Um, The overall take I would take from this deck is that Oketra's Monument's not gone. Be wary of Oketra's Monument decks. Now, the good news about those decks are most of the creatures are extremely cheap or horrible on curve. So that's why they need the Oketra's Monument to set them off of curve. This it is a Maverin deck though. So this deck again, like the other decks, is going to be creating a lot of tokens. Let's go ahead and take a look at his sideboard here. Um, Now, Gideon's Intervention is good sideboard tech against anyone. If you are a deck that's going to kill a lot of his stuff, he does have Dusk Till Dawn. So that is donning back all of these creatures with an Oketra's Monument on the battlefield is definitely something that you do not want to happen against you. It's just going to refill quicker than you can clean up. Authority of the Consoles, be aware of that if you're running some type of aggro deck and you run into one of these. Fragmentize, definitely this deck can deal with most of those enchantments. This deck's actually really well prepared versus most of what I've seen in the meta. So it makes sense that he actually got as far as he did with the deck, putting himself in the top 16. But it's just not one that I would have seen coming. But Oketra's Monument is not gone. And again, like the God Pharaoh's Gift deck, when there's a lack of artifact removal in the format, then some of these powerful artifacts and the decks that are synergized around those are going to come back. Let's go ahead and move on into our YouTube content provider decks. The first one we're going to talk about is by Saffron Olive over on MTG Goldfish. Um, he's definitely got it. This one is truly spicy. Now, this is jank, just a big pile of jank. I played the deck. I, went over, grabbed the cards, and played a couple quick friendly games with it just for fun. I have personally been working on an Abzan control list that I might actually put out this week that had been using Aid from the Cowl, and I had never even thought about Trove to guarantee that you're gonna pop it or activate it every turn. This could be the card I was looking for. I don't know. I will have to play around with it, and I'll say thank you ahead of time for that, Seth. But moving on in, because it's MTG Goldfish, you got to know that there are going to be people playing this. Like I said, I was one of them. I grabbed the cards and I said, "Hey, I'm going to play this for just a friendly." And yeah, I made some mistakes. So mine wasn't as good as Seth's, but Seth did take this to a 3-2 finish. Took down Teamer with it, so it's definitely worth looking at here. And I believe a lot of other people will feel the same way. So make sure that you have added that enchantment hate to your graveyard. Um, the overall idea of this deck is to dirtle you long enough to set up an engine that is more or less unstoppable. The dirtle effects, he wants to ramp into some of these powerful enchantments that will continuously give him more permanence. And almost everything in this deck is a permanent except for 3 Fumigates and 2 Settle the Wreckage. So this deck doesn't have card draw other than treasure map, which becomes a ridiculous amount of card draw later in the game. Um, it doesn't have a ridiculous amount of card draw, but it does have a ridiculous amount of free cast or cheat into play effects. Uh, Passing turn with Revolt and an aid on the field could get you, free, free burn or free avatars or other free enchantments. That being said, I would make sure that I had that enchantment hate. I would make sure that I had something that could stop this combo, if you will, from going off. Also, be aware against this deck that they can reset the board, they can settle the wreckage on you. I think one of the better cards that you might want to play against this deck if you're wearing blue, might be something like River's Rebuke, believe that or not. Um, One of the other big payouts for this deck is an overwhelming or a couple copies of overwhelming splendor, which you put this on your opponent, and if they don't already have some +1/+1 counters on their creatures, they're in trouble. And everyone overlooks enchanted player can't activate abilities that aren't mana abilities or loyalty abilities. So no more sacking things to hidden stockpile. No more activating and count to the sunken ruin. So let overwhelming splendor hit and you're in some major trouble. Gear Hulks become 6 mana 1/1s that do nothing. Um, 2 copies of Sandworm Convergence because hey, he's ramping and why not? Um, Sandworm Convergence, it's not it's not legendary or anything. You can have more than one. Stops Glorybringer and of course anything that's flying, bringing the whole battle down to Earth where you want to be. So works as more protection. Just a really good overall payout for cheating things into play. Making a 5/5 at end turn is pretty cool. Let's take a look at Seth's sideboard. Now, when I said jank, there's not a blue land in this deck. There is a Spire of Industry. However, the plan is to cast this blue or black card off of one of the 3 mana ramp spells that give you double of a color. Granted, there are 6 copies of gift gift of paradise in the deck. 4 gift and what is the other? 4 gift and 2 new horizons. So yes, there are a lot of ways to actually to cast this, but he's definitely got some jank in here. Now Chandra is not in the budget version, um, but I definitely like the idea of Chandra in the deck. If I was going to make a change to the budget version that he offered, I would more than likely only worry about either the lands. If let's take lands out of the equation, if if I wanted to add one card, it would be Settle the Wreckage. Um, I definitely think the ultra budget version hurts a lot from not having the Settle the Wreckage. So I mean, maybe adding the two Settle the Wreckage is just something that you may not want to cut. But either way, the option is there to go for an ultra budget version. I'll quickly give you a look at that. The main deck itself, pretty much exactly the same, except for he added an extra Fumigate and an extra Ixalan's Binding for the two Settle the Wreckage. So maybe that'll be enough. The sideboard, instead of Chandra, there are Bounty of the Luxa, a couple extra Desert's Hold, but he is still using the jank here. Ultra budget, not even Magma Spray, went for Slash of Talons. I assume that's because in the ultra budget version he is running um, he's not running the land base to maybe support the early red. Um, I guess I don't know. That being said, you can take a look at the article. I'll leave a link to the article there. Let's go ahead and take a look at Dev from SBMTG's Bant Rites. I ran into this particular deck twice today, so thanks for that, Dev. Um, this is a Tashana Voice of Thunder deck. The we can call it a growing rights, but the big payout here is Tashana, and once you get started, the payout is enormous. It's absolutely huge. Uh, the deck runs one of the best 1 drops we have right now in Legion's Landing. This is a 1/1 for 1 that if you happen to start getting ahead later or even on turn two, you can play a servo expedition. You're looking at turn three swinging in and flipping your Legion's Landing. Now, it runs Chandler Initiate, it runs Saram's Expertise, and some Inspiring Statuary. It actually wants to be able to use these servos to help get that Tashana down just as early as possible. Has 4 copies of Angel of Invention, which is just really good card. Now, granted, we're not going to be making 6/6 flyers out of this thing like they do in Godpharaoh's Gift, but the amount of creatures we have, they're really, really going to make a lot of use out of the +1/+1 Anthem effect that's on here. Moving on up to, what we're going to do if you actually flip Itlamog Cradle of the Sun into a Gaia's Cradle. You're going to be casting a Tashana Voice of Thunder, or you're going to be sinking that mana into Walking Ballista. Now, this deck, it's really straightforward. Make a whole lot of guys, use those guys to produce mana, or produce mana off the growing rights, then cast one of your big dudes or one of your mana sinks and then kind of go from there. The cool part about Tashana is she chains into more Tashanas, and that's the whole point of running 4 here. Who cares if you play one and one of them has to die? The enter the battlefield effect is what you're looking for. So, I mean, this will allow you to just really churn into just hand after hand of gas once this gets going. So, if I was going to go against this deck, I would definitely want to have some type of board sweeper, something to keep all of the little guys off the battlefield to guarantee that if a Tashana was played, that there wasn't going to be a lot of card draw happening there. Let's move on into the sideboard. He's got some really good tactics here. It looks like he's very well planned for most of the decks that he could run into. Anointer Priest for the additional life gain, and Anointed Procession for giving those extra blockers, getting the most out of his sorceries and such. Sacred Cat, uh, just an absolutely great blocker for the red decks. Even if he dies, you just simply cast it back next turn and bomb it. Carnage Tyrant for the trample, I assume, and against those control decks, just something that's really, really hard to beat. You can't target it. You have to sweep the board to get rid of it. It can't be countered. So even against this card against the blue-black control decks, absolutely terrific. And then he's got a copy of Overwhelming Splendor here. I like Overwhelming Splendor if you can get it off. He does have Growing Rights, and I've seen that thing tap for 15, 10 mana quite a few times. So being able to get 8 to cast Overwhelming Splendor, not that hard. Then another awesome mana sink here, Nissa, Steward of Elements. You draw this, it doesn't matter how much you sink into it. You could sink all of your mana into X if you wanted to, and she would just be phenomenal. And then at that point, maybe you could ultimate her 2 or 3 times in a row, game after game, or turn after turn after turn. If that happens, your opponent's probably dead anyway. Let's go ahead and take a look at the last deck brought to you by a content provider, and that's by Raphael Levy from over at TCG Player. Now, I know Raphael's a pro, so the fact that he put this deck together and he took it to a I only seen 4 matches, but he took it to a 3 out of those 4. Those 3 that he did beat were Tokens, UB Control, and Sultai Energy, and then he lost to Teamer Energy. I don't know what the 5th match was, but either way, he got 3 out of the 4, so that would have been a 3, 3 and X league. Let's go ahead and take a look at his deck here. He's also running, Legion's Landing, but he's also got a much more aggro feel to it. In Dev's deck, he had a lot higher top end. There were some things that he wanted to do up at the top end that just became absolutely crazy and get out of control, powerful type plays. However, in this deck, it's a little bit more straightforward. He is a little bit on the ramp plan, but doesn't have quite as many large things that need that ramp payout. Now, Toolcraft Exemplar on turn 1 into a turn 2 Servo Expedition is 3 damage. Untap, play a Kendra on turn 3, and you're looking at you've done 10 damage by the end of combat on turn 3. That's pretty good, and you still have 1 mana open to do something else with, assuming you can hit one of these 1 drops. You're looking at turn. This deck, if left untouched, can have them dead by turn 4, which is really, really good with the amount of control decks that we see. Um, some really cool cards. A lot of people have been wanting to see the Sage Lifecrafter get play and make those constructs. Very rarely gets play because, who wants to pay 5 mana to make a dude? Possibly this deck. Um, So the general game plan here is like the other green white token variants, using the 4 Saram's expertise and 4 Servo expedition. The plans really make a lot of dudes. Use those dudes to flip your growing rights of Itlamok into Itlamok Cradle of the Sun, and use your new Gaia's Cradle to cast things like Carnage Tyrant, or pump that mana into additional counters for Walking Ballista, or untap, do it again to pump even more counters into Walking Ballista. Uh, Bring back your Resilient Kendras, which cost 6 mana from the graveyard, to give a 4/4 pump to a creature that's on the battlefield. Or maybe you just want to use the Life Crafter to make some really big constructs. These are all definite possibilities, and let's take a look at his sideboard here. First piece of spice I seen that I fell in love with was Oath of Ajani. I've been looking for, some token variants to start showing up, uh, to make some use out of this card, and here it is. I think it's a great card, Oath of Ajani. He's also got a couple copies of Ajani in here, another Carnage Tyrant, uh, 4 copies of Angel of Sanction, a couple Manglehorns, Fairgrounds Warden, and a Ronus. A singleton copy of Authority of the Consults for the haste builds and such. But overall, it's a really, really fun looking deck, and Ralph looked like he was even having a lot of fun playing it. So thanks, Ralph Levy, for the green white tokens list. This has been absolutely great, and there'll be another episode of the Fringe next Wednesday, so catch us there. Don't forget to like and subscribe to make sure that you never miss out and knowing the meta before your league. It's been fun. Catch you next time.